Hi everyone, my name's Diabetor, and lately I've been playing a lot of Doom and Night Rain, and so I've had a few viewer build requests pile up in the meantime. Instead of taking another month to get to them individually, I decided to make a compilation video with a few of them and get a bunch done at once. So here are 3 viewer requested builds for you. If you find this video helpful, please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing. It really helps me out. And if you have any build requests you'd like to see me make, comment down below and I'll add them to my list. Unfortunately, I didn't write down the names of the viewers who requested these builds, sorry about that, but I will make sure to write them down for new requests going forward. All of these builds are going to be at level 125 using the Wretch as their starting class. These are just my personal preferences, and you can bring these builds up to any level you want using any class you want. I'll mention the optimal starting class to use for each of the builds if you're making them from scratch, but any class will work for any of these builds, and you'll just end up with slightly different looking stats once they're done. Our first build is going to be for the Erdsteel Dagger. This dagger is unique in that it has default faith scaling, but its physical damage scales with faith. When you give it a faith scaling affinity on a high faith build, it gets some pretty crazy attack power, and its fast moveset, which includes a 2-hit charged heavy attack, can take advantage of a lot of buffs for some absurd DPS. For the stats, we've got 60 Vigor, which is always your most important stat on any build, 14 Endurance, so you can medium roll with all their gear equipped, and then I dumped every remaining point into Faith, which brought it up to the 80 soft cap. The Erdsteel Dagger requires 7 Strength to wield, which every class has by default, and 12 Dex. We're going to use Millicent's Prosthesis, which gives you plus 5 Dex, meaning that any class will also meet that Dex requirement too. Our weapon loadout is simple. We've obviously got an Erdsteel Dagger, and we're going to use the Sacred Blade Ash of War with the Sacred affinity to give it a ton of holy damage and maximize its faith scaling. We've also got the Erdtree Seal, which we'll be using to cast buff spells, but if we want to use offensive incantations too, then the Erdtree Seal will get the best damage for them with our stats. This build's playstyle is going to revolve around doing charged heavy attacks while two-handing the dagger. As such, for Talismans we've got the Axe Talisman, which increases charged heavy attack damage by 10%, the two-handed Sword Talisman from the DLC, which increases two-handed attack damage by 15%, Millicent's Prosthesis, which gives plus 5 Dex and an increasing damage buff when you hit an enemy multiple times in a short period, and the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, which has a similar multi-hit buff. If you don't have the DLC, then you can swap the two-handed Sword Talisman out for something like the Dragon Crest Great Shield, and if you don't have the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, then you can get the basic Winged Sword Insignia, which has the same effect but a bit weaker. For armor, we've got the Rakshasa set from the DLC, which increases all damage we do by 2% per piece worn. It technically makes you take more damage too, but the way that works means that the armor is basically just slightly worse than other armor sets in the same weight class, so don't worry too much about it. If you don't have the DLC, or you want better protection, then you can use the Knight set instead, or anything you think looks cool, as long as you're in medium equip load. For spells, we've just got a few buffs. First is Blessing of the Erdtree, which restores 12 health per second for 90 seconds. Golden Vow, which increases all damage you do by 15%, and reduces all damage you take by 10% for 80 seconds, and Howl of Shabriri, which increases all damage you do by 25%, but increases all damage you take by 30% for 40 seconds, and Flame Cleanse Me, which isn't a buff, but can cure you of poison and rot, making it nice to have. Howl of Shabriri's 30% damage taken debuff hurts, but we've got Golden Vow and decent armor to make up for it. However, if you don't like that, then you can use something like Boiled Crab instead, which will increase your physical negation by 20% for 60 seconds. Finally, for our physic tiers, we've got the Spiked Crack tier for 15% more charged heavy attack damage, and the Thorny Crack tier for another big multi-hit damage bonus. Alternatively, you may swap out the Spiked tier for the Opaline Hard tier, which reduces all damage you take by 15% and is good for counteracting Howl of Shabriri's debuff. You might also swap the Spike tier out for the Blood-Sucking Crystal tier if you have the DLC, which increases all damage you do by 20%, but will drain your health at a rate of 23 points per second. So your damage will be insane, but you'll have to keep an eye on your health bar. To get the most out of this build, Make sure you cast all your buffs before fights, and make sure to buff the dagger with extra holy damage by casting Sacred Blade. You want to two-hand the dagger and focus on using its charged heavy attacks. These hit multiple times, so not only will you get the benefits of the Axe Talisman and Spike tier, but you'll also build up the multi-hit buffs from the Prosthesis, Winged Sword Insignia, and Thorny tier really quickly, giving you some obscene damage numbers, especially for a dagger. This next build is going to be for the Hand of Malenia. Hand of Malenia's whole thing is that it has Waterfell Dance as its Ash of War, and anyone who's fought Malenia knows how brutal that attack is. It's disappointing then that the Ash of War version of WFD kinda really sucks. With that said, having a good build for it and using it correctly will still let you shred just about anything in the game with this sword. For stats, we've got the usual 60 Vigor. We've also got 13 Endurance, which is so low because I decided to optimize this build to use Malenia's armor, which is pretty lightweight. If you want to use something heavier like the Knight set or Rakshasa set, then you can take points out of Dexterity and bring Endurance up to around 20, or whatever you need to medium roll with your armor set of choice. We've got 16 Strength because that's the minimum required to use HOM, and finally, since HOM is a Dex weapon, I dumped all the remaining points into Dex up to a maximum of 75. I stopped at 75 because we'll be getting plus 5 Dex from Melisand's Prosthesis, which will put us at the 80 Dex soft cap. For weapons, we've got the Hand of Malenia, which is a somber weapon and cannot be given an affinity, and we've got a dagger with the Golden Vow Ash of War. It wasn't worth putting points into Faith for this build, so instead of using the Golden Vow incantation like in the previous build, we'll just use the Ash of War instead, which has no stat requirements but is a bit weaker and lasts about half as long. For Talismans, we've got the Shard of Alexander to boost Waterfell Dance's damage by 15%, Melisand's Prosthesis for plus 5 Dex and its multi-hit buff, which will complement WFD really well, Rotten Winged Sword Insignia or the basic Winged Sword Insignia, also for its multi-hit buff, and the last slot is kind of a flex slot because there aren't really that many things which synergize with WFD super well. So I tried Lord of Blood's Exaltation for its 20% damage buff after you make an enemy bleed, but HOM can't be buffed with more bleed buildup by something like Blood Grease or Blood Flame Blade, and it doesn't do enough bleed buildup on its own to really make Lord of Blood's Exaltation worth using. So I would recommend you use something like the Dragon Crest Great Shield for 20% more physical negation instead. For armor, I used Malenia's set because I figured a person wanting HOM will probably want to do Malenia cosplay. It's not amazing armor, but armor is mostly cosmetic in this game anyway, and with 60 Vigor it doesn't really matter. If you want something better, then there's the Knight set if you want more protection and poise, or if you have the DLC, there's Rakshasa set for more damage. Again, make sure you take some points out of Dex and bring Endurance up if you use one of these sets to make sure you're in medium load. We have no spells for this build, but we do have the Golden Vow Ash of War, and you can get Boiled Crab to increase your physical negation by another 20%. If you're willing to put a couple points into Faith, then at 15 Faith you get access to Bestial Vitality for some health regen over time, and Flame Grant Me Strength, which increases your physical damage by 20% for 30 seconds. Just keep in mind that FGMS will not stack with Boiled Crab. Finally, in our Wondrous Physic, we've got the Opaline Hard tier to reduce the damage we take by 15%, and we've got the Thorny Crack tier for its multi-hit buff, which will make the sword do a ton of damage once you build that up. Alternatively, you can swap the Opaline Hard tier out for the Bloodsucking tier if you have the DLC, which will increase all damage you do by 20%, but drain your health by 23 points per second. So again, make sure you watch your health bar if you decide to use that. As far as katanas go, the Hand of Malenia gets good range and pretty high damage with high dex investment. Make sure you take advantage of its running heavy attacks, which do a lengthy, high piercing damage stab. Waterfell Dance's timing is a bit weird, so try to use it when an enemy is running towards you instead of once they're directly in front of you. And against bosses, I recommend you use charged heavy attacks to stance break them first, and then use WFD to blunder them while they're stunned. Our final build request for today was to make a pure shield build. I interpreted this to exclude the thrusting shields. Don't worry, I do have a build for those on my list. And so I decided to go with one of my favorite underrated options, the spiked Palisade shield with the cold affinity. This thing can make you pretty tanky, and its combined bleed and frostbite buildup will allow you to shake off chunks of the enemy's health really quickly, especially when you use the Shield Crash Ash of War to hit the enemy 5 times in a row. For stats, we've got 60 Vigor, 22 Endurance to medium roll with our chosen gear, and then I dumped every point after that into Strength. The Spiked Palisade shield has no dex requirements, so we don't need any dex. Technically, you'd get the most optimal damage by bringing Strength to 54, so that two-handing it will effectively bring you up to the 80 Strength soft cap, and then putting points into Intelligence after that to increase the magic damage added by the Cold Affinity. However, this build is going to focus on using the Shield Crash Ash of War, and most Ashes of War do not benefit from two-handing the weapon. This means that we want to maximize our one-handed attack power, and the way to do that is by going all in on Strength and ignoring Intelligence entirely. For weapons, we've just got the Spiked Palisade shield with the Shield Crash Ash of War and the Cold Affinity, and we've got a dagger with the Golden Vow Ash of War. For talismans, we've got the Great Shield Talisman, which reduces the stamina damage you take when you block attacks. This shield has relatively low guard boost to begin with, and giving it the Cold Affinity brings it down to a fairly bad 59 guard boost, so the Great Shield Talisman helps to make up for that. Without it, you'll have a harder time blocking attacks. We've also got the Shard of Alexander to boost Shield Crash's damage by 15%. We've got Lord of Blood's Exaltation to get a 20% damage boost for 20 seconds after making an enemy bleed. And we've got either Millicent's Prosthesis or the Rotten Wing Sword Insignia for the successive attacks buff it gives. Shield Crash hits up to 5 times in a row, so it'll build up that buff really quickly. In the build, I used Millicent's Prosthesis because I recommend getting that on your first playthrough instead of RWSI, but if you have RWSI, then that would be the better option because it gets a higher buff than Millicent's Prosthesis. For armor, I included 2 different sets. Both sets use the White Mask, which provides a 10% damage buff for 20 seconds after making an enemy bleed, similar to Lord of Blood's Exaltation. The preferred armor set is of course going to be the Rakshasa set, which provides at least 51 poise and increases all damage you do by 2% for Peace Worn. However, if you don't have the DLC, then you can use Blythe's armor and greaves and the Knight Gauntlets or whatever other gloves you want as long as you're in medium load. This loadout will also give you at least 51 poise and decent protection. We've got no spells, but for buffs we've got the Golden Vow Ash of War on the dagger, and Boiled Crab to increase our physical negation by 20% for 60 seconds. There's also the Opaline Hardtear and the Wondrous Physic to increase all our damage negation by 15% for 3 minutes. These, combined with the high vigor, strong armor, and blocking with the shield, will make us tanky as fuck and do great damage as well. Finally, we've also got the Thorny Crack tier in the Physic, which provides another multi-hit buff like Millicent's Prosthesis, meaning that after just a couple hits with Shield Crash, they'll be doing some pretty wild damage numbers. Shield Crash is a really fun Ash of War because not only does it hit a bunch of times, thus building up those multi-hit buffs and doing a good amount of status buildup, and not only does it stun lock any enemy that can't poise through its hits, but it also counts as blocking attacks while you're doing it, meaning you could just tank hits while also doing hilarious amounts of damage. I could have gone with an Arcane build here and used the Occult Affinity instead of Cold for more bleed buildup, but something interesting about this shield is that it does 70 bleed buildup by default, and the Cold Affinity only reduces that down to 65 bleed buildup while also adding a ton of Frostbite buildup. This is one of the few cases where you can actually get a ton of Frostbite and bleed buildup on one weapon. So not only are you taking off chunks of the enemy's health with bleed procs, but you're also freezing them and making them take 20% more damage from all your attacks by using Frostbite. Combine that with all the other buffs we've got, and this thing just does fucking stupid damage, especially when you consider how easy it is to use. I think that's enough for now, so I'm going to call that the end of this video. I have more build requests on my list, and I intend to speed up my upload schedule, so stay tuned for those in the coming days. If you have any build requests or requests for anything else related to Elden Ring or Elden Ring Night Rain, let me know down in the comments and I'll add those to my list too. And yes, I do have plans for a bunch of Night Rain videos. I've just been getting good at it before I make the videos, you feel me? Instead of other YouTubers who rush to be the first and then post fucking slop that sucks. I actually play the game and then make videos about it. Anyway, If you found this video helpful, please leave a like, share the video, and consider subscribing. It really helps me out. My name is Diabedor, and I will catch you later.